Ghostbusters is a reboot of the 1984 Ghostbusters, this one starring Kristen Wiig, Melissa McCarthy, Kate McKinnon, and Leslie Jones. Now normally I start off my video by saying, oh, this was a movie I was really looking forward to. This is not one of those times. In fact, I was pretty much dreading going into this movie because, and I think most people will agree with me on this, the marketing campaign for this movie was awful. I mean, all the trailers and clips that we got for this movie leading up to it just all made this movie look like it was gonna be fucking terrible. And also because the first Ghostbusters is one of the most iconic comedies ever made. This movie had really funny humor, amazing writing, a cast that worked really well together, very good special effects for its time, and above all, an extremely original concept. No movie before this one had ever really delved into the concept about busting ghosts, and that's what made Ghostbusters so original and so iconic. And with reboots, traditionally speaking, having the shitty track record that they do, nobody really had any confidence in this movie. So yeah, I was really not looking forward to seeing this movie, but as a YouTube movie reviewer, I knew I had to see it because, well, I love you guys. But now that I have seen it, the question is it as bad as everyone thought it was gonna be? So towards the beginning of this movie, we see Kristen Wiig. She's a professor at Columbia University. She's about to receive this promotion in the university itself, but that all becomes questioned when an old book that she and Melissa McCarthy had published gets republished. And that's because this book revolved around Kristen Wiig and Melissa McCarthy delving into the existence of ghosts. Kristen Wiig along the way felt that was a little too ridiculous for her, and she went and pursued teaching, which as a result distanced herself from Melissa McCarthy. So not wanting her reputation to be questioned, Kristen Wiig goes and meets with Melissa McCarthy and her new assistant Kate McKinnon. Melissa McCarthy and Kate McKinnon, they both get called into this museum to investigate some haunting that had happened earlier in the movie. And Kristen Wiig, she agrees to go along to help them under the conditions that the book is taken out of publication. So the three of them go to this museum. They eventually do discover the ghost that was haunting the place, which eventually just throws up a bunch of slimy shit on Kristen Wiig. So now the three of them try to tell the university about what happened, but the university now thinks they're all insane and they all get removed from the university. With that, they all now think it's the perfect time to just officially go into their own business of busting ghosts in New York City. And during, I would say, the second third of this movie is when the group decides to hire Chris Hemsworth to be their receptionist. They bring in Leslie Jones to be the fourth Ghostbuster because she knows New York City and also because she encountered a ghost at the subway she was previously working at. Subway as in train station, not subway as in restaurant, in case you were confused. And it's also in this time we see the group testing out different equipment, you know, to try to bust these ghosts, and also in one instance where they go to this concert of sorts to actually bust a ghost. And I will be honest with you guys, the second third of this movie is when the movie really showed a lot of its give and take here. And staying in this section of the movie for a little while, I'm gonna say this right now, the two most pleasant surprises of this movie were the characters of Chris Hemsworth and Leslie Jones. Because when I had seen the trailers for this movie and I saw what the characters of Chris Hemsworth and Leslie Jones were gonna be like, I sat there and I said, these two characters are just going to annoy the fucking shit out of me throughout it. But no, being honest with you guys, those two were the funniest people in this whole movie. I mean, yes, Chris Hemsworth is a complete idiot, and Leslie Jones really plays on her being, you know, the stereotypical black lady in these kind of movies. But the two of them were both able to exercise and own their roles to a certain degree that it actually brought some pretty funny moments throughout this movie. And that's another thing to say about this movie. It does have decent humor. There were a lot of chuckle-worthy moments throughout this movie. But that's a bit of a problem as well. They were just chuckle-worthy. There was nothing in this movie that really got me laughing. Definitely didn't get me gut-busting laughing. And another one of those disappointments is the fact that Chris Hemsworth and Leslie Jones ended up being the funniest ones in this movie. I mean, you have Kristen Wiig, Melissa McCarthy, and Kate McKinnon. These three women are hysterical. Kristen Wiig and Melissa McCarthy, I feel, particularly showed that in Bridesmaids. And the fact that neither of them really had me laughing in this movie was kind of a disappointment. Personally, I feel like these Ghostbusters could have delivered some funnier moments if they had better chemistry with each other. What was one thing that made the first Ghostbusters so awesome? The Ghostbusters in that movie had unbelievably great chemistry together. They just played off one another back and forth so well that it delivered some really funny moments throughout it. These Ghostbusters, they didn't really have the greatest chemistry, and as a result, they didn't really feel as much like a team as you would want them to be. And that's another thing to focus on. The second third of this movie touches more on the Ghostbusters Ghostbusters preparing themselves to bust ghosts than actually busting ghosts. It's during this time they really only bust that one ghost in the concert that I had told you about, but other than that, it's them just preparing themselves to combat other ghosts by upgrading their equipment and finding out what works and what doesn't. And as a result, the movie does feel boring, it feels like it's dragging on, and above all, it has you sitting there wanting more because you know there can be more. Now going into the final third of this movie, the Ghostbusters now encounter who is supposed to be the villain of this movie. He's a guy named Rowan. He's been mocked by society because of his firm belief in ghosts and also the fact that the dude is fucking weird. But it turns out that he's the one who's been behind all these ghosts emerging in New York City because he wants them all to rise to form this apocalypse that he wants to lead upon the earth. And I will say, I didn't really like him as a villain. I mean, he was annoying, he was weird, he was awkward. There was just nothing about him that could really make anyone appreciate him as a villain. So the Ghostbusters, they find Rowan and they intend to bring him in, but instead he just decides to commit suicide by electrocuting himself. Which at the time has us and the Ghostbusters sitting there like, okay. But it's in this moment that the Ghostbusters discovered that his true plan was to kill himself so he could become a ghost and as a result take possession of the living so he could fully command this army of ghosts. He eventually possesses Chris Hemsworth. He goes on his merry way of causing chaos throughout the city. The Ghostbusters know they can stop them, but they've been told not to by the mayor and the police because they don't want everyone to freak out about the ghosts. But the Ghostbusters know they're gonna stop this guy, and now we get a big climatic battle between the Ghostbusters and Rowan's army of ghosts. And I will say, the final conflict in this movie, it definitely had its enjoyment. It has its throwbacks to the original Ghostbusters, you know, with the big marshmallow man attacking the city, which was nice. And above all, it has comedy. You get to actually see the Ghostbusters actually really fight ghosts, which is cool. And it's also just nice finally seeing the Ghostbusters use that equipment that was teased to us in the second third of this movie and actually putting it to use. It's actually pretty cool when you see it. So they fight through the army, they now get to Rowan himself, and in this moment he abandons Chris Hemsworth's body and he uses his spirit to take on a giant form of the Ghostbusters logo, which I actually thought looked really awesome. And so he's just going about the city, he's just wrecking complete havoc. So now the Ghostbusters know the only way to stop him is to use the nuclear reactor in their car and collide it into the portal that's releasing all these ghosts. The plan works, Rowan's getting sucked back into the dimension, but he takes Melissa McCarthy with him. And it's in this moment Kristen Wiig rescues Melissa McCarthy by attaching herself to some chain that she found in the middle of the street, going into the portal, grabbing Melissa McCarthy, and freeing them both by bringing them back to the land of the living. I mean, you see that moment happen, and it leaves you sitting there like, that is way too big of a convenience. The fact that Kristen Wiig found a chain in the middle of the street, and it was long enough to get her deep into the portal to rescue Melissa McCarthy and then just be able to send them both back into the present world. It's just ridiculous. It's like how earlier in the movie when the Ghostbusters were questioned for actually busting ghosts, and as a result, Kristen Wiig decided to release the one ghost they had caught just to show everyone. You look at stuff like that and it's like, that's ridiculous, and if they had not done that or avoided that, none of this shit would have happened. So now the movie ends, the Ghostbusters are all heroes, and the mayor's office secretly decides to thank them by giving them an upgraded headquarters. So all in all, I will say, Ghostbusters was an average movie. The movie has chuckle-worthy moments, decent writing, solid visuals, characters who I thought were going to be annoying that ended up being funny, a fairly entertaining climatic battle, but the movie also has a lot of jokes that don't really hit, some bad pacing issues, characters that you don't feel have the greatest chemistry among each other, an annoying villain, a lot of way too convenient moments for a movie, and above all, the fact that this movie is trying to be a reboot of Ghostbusters is really hard to do because it just lacks the originality of Ghostbusters. As a result, a lot of stuff in this movie feels very familiar, which is another disappointment to have with it. And in the end, I will say this movie is not as bad as I thought it was going to be, but it's not as good as I would want a reboot like this to be. It's just okay. So that's all I gotta say, guys. Thank you so much for watching my video. Don't forget to leave a comment, like, subscribe, and I will see you all next time.